Now that we have our controller set up, we can begin to set this up. That way it's functional. Now, I'm going to go ahead and hide my, or just minimize my outliner for the moment. Come over here and select the left clavicle controller. With this selected, there's a few things that we have to do. We've already named it, and we need to have it follow the joints, but also affect the joints. Okay, so when it comes to this, we're going to use a layout that works pretty well for having it follow, but leaving its attributes open. Again, the attributes, guys, are going to be in the channel box. That's any of these things here. A lot of the main ones for this can be it translates and the rotates. The scale, it's optional. It's depending on if you need your character to scale up or down. In this case, if you don't lock and hide the scale during the lock and hide procedure to clean up this rig, then it will be accessible for you to be able to scale this thing up and even set keys on some weirdness if you would like that to happen. But again, remember, base it off the animation, speak to the animator, decide what needs to happen with this rig before you set it up. Getting onto it, we can take this and we're going to parent the left clavicle manipulator, or controller in this case, the left clavicle controller to the left shoulder joint. So I'm going to take that and I need to parent it the old-fashioned way. So I'll select the child, shift select the what is going to be the parent, and I shouldn't say old-fashioned way because this is the edit parenting method, or I can hit P on my keyboard in order to get this across. All right, there's the hotkey right there, P. But I'll just click parent, and remember, in this order selection, you have to select, or when you're using edit parent, you have to select the child first, shift select the parent. Now that we've done that, it should follow along. I mean, you could always test it. In this case, you don't really have to worry about breaking anything. All right? And it's following along. I'll hit Control Z because anytime we test something, we want to get it back to the position that it should be in. Now, we've parented the left clavicle manipulator to the shoulder. This guy right here to the shoulder. And actually, I parented it to the clavicle, did I not? What I can do here is, since I use that type of parent, it's very forgiving for me to select the left clavicle controller or manipulator, shift select the new parent, the one I should have parented it to in the first place, and go up to edit down to parent again, or hit P. And what it'll do is that this type of parenting, this child, which is the manipulator or the controller, can only have one parent. So if I tell it to parent to the shoulder by clicking this or hitting P, I've now broke the link to this other joint, so it's not parented to this one anymore because it could only have one parent, or follow one parent in this case. So I broke the connection to this one and I transferred it over to this one just by simply doing that. Now if I were to select this one, I can tell it's already parented to it because that's glowing green as if though it's selected. And if I move this up and down, this joint is the one that follows, which is good. And always undo something if you've tested it. I can go back up to this and select it, and with this left clavicle controller selected, I will group it to itself. Okay, now if I group it to itself, it's going to do this whole bit. And let me group it first. I'll go to edit down to group, and I know that the group is going to make it drop to the origin of our scene. If I go over to the side and I click on the box, the option box, this will come up. It'll say, do you want the group, so right here the group's pivot point, to go to the origin, or do you want to go to the center of your object? And we could simply set it up that way just by clicking center, and now when I group it, you're going to see that the group node, the pivot point of the group node, will go to the center of the object, or the center of the objects in the group. So that's another way of doing it. And what I can do is right away, I do want to move the pivot point of the new group to spine 5. Now, oops, I put this in mode. Okay, so if I take this thing So before we do anything else here, let's actually name this. We want to call this, instead of group 1, we're going to call it left clavicle group. And I like to put a capital G and an RP when I do the grouping. You're totally fine if you would like to spell it out, the entire part for group, that's totally fine. Or if you're going to abbreviate left, again, just remember how you're doing things. In this case, I would kind of stick with what we're doing here. That way you can refer back to this video and kind of find what the problem areas are just by selecting the names or typing in the names. Okay? So this group node is now named. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this group node and we want to parent it to spine 5. Spine 5 being this thing right here, the spine that tees off. Now, let's say you didn't make a spine 5 up here, maybe this is spine 4, spine 7 or 6 or something like that. Just go to the spine there where the arms actually tee off of, or to the clavicle out to each arm, and that's why we call it the T. Okay, so with that group selected, and again, if you want to make sure you have the group node, you could tap the up and down arrows. Down arrow gets the left clavicle controller. You can see that right here. And if I tap the up arrow, it's the left clavicle group. So good. I have the group node selected. I can shift select this thing right here. And again, if you're having trouble selecting things, you can select the bone right there. The bone is going to select the joint that is before it. And look at to see the bone, how it's wedging out. If it's pointing to a child, like this being a child, if I were to select this one, it allows me to basically select where this tees off, which is going to be spine 5. So I'll hold down shift, click that, and another way of checking is I should have spine 5 ... the 3 dots indicating that I have more than one object selected. I can hit P or go to edit down to parent, same thing, and now I have successfully parented the left clavicle group to spine 5. Another thing that we can do here is that once we've done that, we're going to be able to select our left clavicle controller, and this is the one that we have here. If you called it manip, that's totally fine. I think it might be manip in the notes. But going based off of this, if I go to the left clavicle controller, I can move its pivot point, because you see that it's right in the center here, to the shoulder. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead to my display layers here in the channel box, go down to geometry, and I'm going to hide the geometry. That way when I move this pivot point using the snap to point tool, which I will actually hold down V, I want to snap it right here to the shoulder. Okay, so the hotkeys I will be using are D and V. So D puts me in move pivot point tool. V puts me in snap to point tool. Okay, you could easily hit insert. So if I hit the insert key, it puts me in the move pivot point tool. If I hit the insert key again, that's the only way to get out of that move pivot point tool. Okay, you could also click on this icon right here, the snap to points, and basically it's going to be on until you turn it off. Now, let's say that this thing was not working. I'm going to hold down D and I'm going to hold down V. And you're going to see that this turns into like a little square icon here. Alright. And I'm dragging this around and it's not snapping to anything. That's because I already had this tool on. So if I release V, I already had this tool on, and basically if I hold down V now, it's actually turning the tool off. So it's basically an inverse for the tool. Okay? Another way of knowing is that, look, if I hold down D, you're going to see that this thing is circled. Alright, I lost my handles by holding down D, the D key, as in David, and I lost my handles to move the tool around, or to move it like using the translation tool here. And basically, with the snap to point on, I'll turn it off real quick so I can use the hotkey. If I hold down V now, V with the snap to point tool on, basically I have a circle here indicating that I'm in the snap to point tool. If I hold or release V, I released V now, as in Valerie, I have a box. So that indicates that it's not snapping to anything. Okay, so pay attention to the little icons that kind of help with some frustration when you're tired. I'm going to hold down D and V together. Hover over the little yellow part here. Hold down my left mouse button and I'll snap it to the shoulder. Okay. So again, that moves the pivot point. And I release the left mouse button first, then I release my hotkeys. Okay. Once I do that, what I'm going to do is I would like to constrain this. But before we do any constraining and such, it's a good idea to freeze your transformations. So if I were to go up to Modify with the left clavicle controller or manipulator selected, go up to Modify, down to Freeze Transformations, and you can also do the same thing if you tap the up arrow to the group. I go up to Modify, down to Freeze Transformations. Okay. Now the group node might change a little bit. That shouldn't really mess things up. But if you find any errors with that, feel free to redo this and it should be fine. Now it's kind of odd that it did it like that. I'm not sure if I have some weirdness going on or what is going on there, but we'll see if it affects it in any weird way. That might allow us to do some troubleshooting that you guys will get for free in this tutorial. So for the most part, if it's acting weird, I might have to change that. Okay, but I'll select, ooh, yeah, look at that. That's funky. I'm going to go ahead and do that because really, I'm not going to be using the group node. So I didn't like what it was doing. And I don't want that to transfer over to this guy. Okay, I want this one to be clean. So I just undid the freeze transformation on the group node. And I do want to have my transformations frozen on this one because I want this handle to work. Okay, this controller to work. And I don't want to guess on the numbers. So make sure you do freeze the transformations on it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to parent constrain this to, or parent constrain the shoulder I should say, to this object. That way this object with the grouping and parenting will follow my skeleton if it bends over or does a flip or something like that. But I can also key this object to allow the shoulder to move with the object. Okay, so we have some backward functionality. It's really a nice setup without coding. So what I can do is I can decide that I'm going to use a constraint, and again guys, in the constraints we have to select the parent then the child. Okay, so if I select this one because I want it to control the shoulder, I can come in here, shift select the, I'll select the bone here of the shoulder, and hopefully it says yep, left shoulder ... So I know that I did get that joint. So I selected the parent, shift selected the child. I'm going to go up to constrain. I'm going to go down to parent option box. And I just want to make sure that maintain offset is turned on and all the rest of the stuff works just fine. If you guys are ever wondering about any of these tools, go up to edit when you open a tool, go down to reset settings, and that will reset a lot of this stuff, and you're going to see that maintain offset by default is on with the parent constraint. All I have to do is go down to the bottom left and click on add, and that's perfect. So if I were to select this, I want to make sure that everything stayed frozen. Alright, now this is the part where you can lock and hide what you don't need. So if we're not going to use rotations or scale or visibility, we'd be able to lock and hide them. Now I do like to have you guys wait till the end when you're first learning to rig to lock and hide this stuff. Just make sure you highlight it in your notes or make note of it to go back and lock and hide everything that you decide that you do not need. That way the animator does not break your rig. Okay? With this, we can save this, and I like to save it as a legacy. So I would save this as file, save scene as. Just in case you mess something up, you can go back to the previous version because undos are sometimes unfriendly at this point. Okay? And I'm just going to call this left clavicle controller 02. Hit enter. And then continue. And then you want to test this. Okay? So basically, if I were to take my hips and I move it around, I can see that the clavicle's following just nicely. Okay, I'll undo that move. I'm going to rotate it just to see if it goes with the rotation. Nice. and I'm not getting any weirdness. Okay, I'll undo twice because I did 2 moves. And I'm going to select this object now, the controller, and we moved the pivot point over, that way we can get a roll. So it's actually going to allow us to, rotate this if we need to. More so could be the movement of this, so I can move this up and down. And I could also get kind of a shrug thing going on there. So there's different ways we can set this up. And depending on if you needed any movement on the clavicle, maybe there's something that we needed to do just for geometry purposes, not because our clavicle would really move so much that way. But our clavicle does update. See that? It does update with this joint being moved. And that's a functionality that we can use for a shoulder shrug or, whatever we're trying to go for. Now in this one, we can probably consider this done. And in the next tutorial, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and check the arm for any other things. Well, I'm going to check for the arm for any other things that I might be missing in the notes. I really like you guys to do that. Make sure you're checking all of this stuff, and then we're going to keep moving on from there.